call the work session to order. First, we have the 10-year long-term financial plan.
We thought we would maybe do introductions.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I'll start. I am Tammy Umdahl with Northland Public Finance. We worked on the long-term plan that is before you, and we have been working on capital planning and potential bond issuance as well with city staff. So we're here to go through it. We'll get into it more after we finish with introductions. So thank you for having us this evening and look forward to the discussion.
And I'm Jessica Green with Northland Securities.
I'm Christy Mock, City Council Member.
Lori Sayer, Council Member.
Reed Welch, Council Member. Aaron Schmidt, the Assistant City Engineer.
Vicki Sunzeiden, City Clerk.
Chad, Public Services Director.
Erin Smith, Community Development Director.
Eric Pershman, I'm a council member.
Linda Schutte, Finance Director.
Brett Merritt, City Manager.
Courtney Johnson, Mayor.
Nice to see you. All right, I'm just going to take a couple of minutes to introduce the long-term financial plan. So as you all know, the city has maintained a long-term financial plan for many years. The main purpose is revenue sufficiency and levy and rate calculations. And starting this year, staff and council decided to change the long-term financial plan from five years to a 10-year outlook. And we enlisted the help of Tammy and Jess. So because this was such a large lift, we broke it up into many work sessions, as you remember. We had staffing plan, vehicles and equipment, building and facilities, streets, infrastructure, and parks. So the long-term financial plan has been drafted. So we have a draft for you tonight. And the financial impact and proposed future utility rates will be discussed and presented for you by Tammy and Jessica.
All right. I'm going to give the first half, and then Jessica's going to give the second half. And maybe to get started, so you received 2 paper copies, and they both seem like novels. The first one, if it would have been printed double-sided, is the overview, the presentation that we're going to go through this evening. And then if you have copies of the long-term plan and you have questions as we go along, we can certainly dive into it, but we're not going to be opening that unless you have questions. So if that's okay, Mary, if we go along, sure. You have questions. And I understand you keep your work session pretty informal. So as Lynn said, this isn't the first time. It's not the city said we should do long-term planning. The city's been doing long-term finance planning. We went out further as far as the term and more comprehensive to the extent. And the reason this looks like a novel is because the narrative. As we talk to staff, really that narrative piece, other than just the numbers, is so important because that tells the story and it's more enduring from year to year, including when there's turnover in the council, turnover at the staff level. Sometimes it's hard when there's just numbers to remember what was meant by that number. So really that added to the length. The other piece of it is it includes every single city fund, and it's set up so as funds are added, and funds are simply buckets that staff uses to keep track of revenue and expense, which is why it's also more lengthy than what you have seen in the past. So very comprehensive in its scope. Brent, thanks for turning. Off the bat, I want to make the point, this is not your budget. So some nights hear that as soon as I say that staff ink dries, things have changed. That's true already with the acquisition of property for the municipal facility. That's in here that would have happened in 23. That changed, and that happens all the time. This is not your budget. This isn't where you make those annual policy decisions. It's really a snapshot in time. And as we go through some of the key assumptions, including on development, it's a point in time given assumptions made. But it is meant to be enduring, meaning updated at least once a year and then allowing for the city to pivot or adjust as there are changes in the assumptions. Maybe 10 years is a long time. Likely we'll have another recession during that time, for example, which would impact the timing, but hopefully not the long-term scope with respect to development projections, for example. So that's important to keep in mind as you go through it. As we develop these plans with Northland, we focus on 2 things. We focus on revenue sufficiency across all city funds, and we focus on levy and rate calculations. And when I say rate calculations, not just for the utility funds, but also for the city's tax rate, which equates to property taxes and projecting that out as well. So that's really the focus, and I'm going to dive into that a little bit more. With respect to revenue sufficiency, that's about identifying objectives that we're trying to achieve for fund balance, ending cash balance, and being able to model that as part of our process with staff. When we're done with this, we're turning the models over to city staff. We don't treat them as proprietary for the purpose of, I just said assumptions change all the time. Therefore, it's really important to be looking at that on an annual basis as you continue to update those long-term plans. With respect to the levy and rate calculations, we're modeling, and in the report and in the presentation that we're going to give tonight, projected future annual tax levies and tax rates. And I'll get into what tax rates are. Some of the council I know what that is. Some might be explain that more. We'll talk about that. And utility rates to meet those revenue objectives, and we'll talk about what those objectives are. I think Lynn touched on the approach, really with us collaborating with staff and initially populating this model and writing the report. So really the important input of the capital improvement plan, city operating budgets, plans this year as far as where 23 is estimated to close. We worked with city staff on that. Revenue sufficiency. That simply means revenue that is sufficient to meet current and future obligations. So not just next year or tomorrow, but over that long-term planning horizon. That's what we mean by revenue sufficiency. It means meeting the city's adopted fund balance policy.
Yeah, so is that, Brent and Courtney, was that something that the city has set itself, or is there like a general, good practices amount that you want as a city to have? Or like that's basically right, our just kind of cash on hand to cover, typical expenses and, budget misprojections, that kind of stuff, right?
Sure. There's a range that cities can, if I miss anything,
Sure.
just jump in, but generally I've seen anywhere from like 30 to 50%.
Okay.
Typically, I think it's around like 6 months of general fund operating expenditures for a year is kind of where you want to have your balances, but it can range, but it comes up pretty significantly during bond rating calls, and they want to know what your fund balance policy is, where your funds are in relation to that, what kind of planning you're doing, where you're seeing your trends. Am I missing?
Right on point.
Okay.
And for Minnesota cities, the reason in that range is because of how taxes are distributed twice a year. So making it till you get your first half
Gotcha.
and then
Okay.
the second half.
Okay. Thanks.
For the utility funds, so this is as part of the long-term plan and how we look at it, this is not city policy. Some cities, as they get into this, decide to put that into their policies, but I just want to note that. So for the utility funds, one of the objectives that we focused on when looking at revenue sufficiency is 3 months of operating expense. It's different. It's not like taxes where you get it twice a year. So 3 months of operating expense. The following year, debt service payments. So debt service simply means principal and interest payments. That would be on hand. The following year, capital acquisition, where the city is planning to use cash, PAYGO. Do you have that cash on hand? And we're projecting over the next decade. So each year, and then given your capital plans, is there sufficient cash projected to be on hand? And then last, reserves for future capital improvements. That's that contingency unknown amount. Depends on, cities are different in that, including a long-term view. As we get into this, you'll see with the treatment facility, we show some reserve for that in the future spend down of that in a moment. Before we get into some of the charts, I want to revisit this discussion on rate calculations, because if you had a chance to review the report and the charts, we talk not just about city tax levy, we talk about the city's tax rate. So a few points here, and we'll walk through them. So the city council, all of you, certify and set the annual tax levy. That's what you have control over. You tell Carver County how much you need in total tax revenue, and then they spread that and collect that for you. While we talk about tax rate and we project it in this long-term plan, you do not adopt or set the city tax rate. and I'll explain why not. And the next one, that really explains it. The tax rate is a factor of the certified tax levy, which you have control over and you'll be adopting coming up here, spread over the city's tax base. Tax base in Minnesota means net tax capacity. It's a factor, if you hear that term in reports, including in our report, it is a fact. Net tax capacity in Minnesota means taxable market value, just like all of you might look at your house and what's your house valued at. In Minnesota, the state legislature determines different class rates and percent of that total market value of a home that is taxable. The same is true for commercial property. That's how the state kind of plays around with tax burden. More of commercial property, taxable market value, is subject to taxes, net tax capacity, than residential. You have no control over that. But we do focus on tax rate in here, so we wanted to take a moment to talk about what is this with respect to comparison to tax levy. So the plan does provide information on projected future city tax rates, and the reason we focus on that is we're trying to get to projected impact to your taxpayers over the long term. That is very important in a growing community, because if you look at just the tax levy, it doesn't account for what is the projected increase in the tax base over time from that development. There are assumptions. We are making estimates of what the timing is of the housing units and commercial. Many factors impact that final tax rate. Many of those factors are outside of your control. Piece that you control is the tax levy. To some extent, of course, you are promote and then your decisions that you make impact the development assumptions as well. Tonight, I'm not going to get into fiscal disparities, but I just note that if you don't know what that is, the sharing of tax base in the metro area is another factor that impacts your tax rate. And in closing on this one, again, your focus is the annual levy. Here's a chart that's showing you, and this is from the study, estimated taxable market value changes by year. And this is, excuse me, not changes, increase in taxable market value from new development. And it's looking at it in total with residential and commercial combined. And you see ups and downs, and that's simply a factor. And staff assisted us with this in estimating out the growth in housing units and commercial development. It will not look exactly like this. We know that, you know that, but it is an assumption at a point in time to help inform the plan.
Why does 2029 look like it has such a big dip compared to the rest that kind of?
We'd have to dig in and let you know what the inputs were for that. We can
Okay.
get back to the council.
Okay.
And I won't have you open it, but I just, as point of reference, on page 8 is the detail behind that in the written report. The next slide on page 12. So this is graphing out net tax capacity. And a moment ago I said tax levy, which you determine, gets spread over this net tax capacity to determine your city tax rate. That's why this is so important from a projection standpoint. The blue is what we're projecting for existing property. We are conservative in that 3% projecting that there'll be some growth. But really the growth, projected growth in net tax capacity for Carver is that new construction. And that's what you're seeing there in the yellow bar. Slide 13 shows total city tax levy. So this is what you control. This is what you adopt every year. And we have broken it down in this chart by general fund, and you can see growth there that factors in growth of new city staff that is in your long-term plan. It factors in growth in non-tax revenue, meaning that helps offset some of your costs, and it factors in growth in personnel, cost of living adjustments, as well as other inflationary adjustments. Debt service is inclusive, and that's principal and interest that you pay on bonds that are paid from tax levy. And that includes both your existing debt as well as debt that we have modeled. And then that includes debt to be issued for facility improvements, for example. That is reflected in here. The top one is for street maintenance. City has a plan, and it's reflected in here to begin to put in place tax levy related to street maintenance to help support issuing less debt and having some funds on hand to pay for street improvements. So that is reflected in the plan. Slide 14, this is showing that city tax rate. So your tax levy spread over that net tax capacity chart that we just showed. So you can see projected, and again, we don't know exactly. 24 is probably pretty close unless there's some major changes in what the county has for preliminary base. But you can see some changes from year to year. But we would note on a numerical basis going forward, that changes within that 0.03. So, and there's some ability from year to year. This is not your budget. I started my comments by that if the city said, well, we want to do this or keep it a little less, there's ability in how you structure debt and the payment, there's ability of timing of when staff is added compared to growth, all those things. But just simply given the assumptions in the plan, this is what it would look like over time.
And Reed, just to call out for you, part of our strategic plan, one of the goals is not to have the tax rate increase or decrease by more than 3%, so
Sure,
that's why
sure.
this is significant.
No, that's good.
So the next two charts simply graph then that tax rate across example properties. So this is for residential properties, and for illustration purposes, we just picked a range of taxable market value. And the bump that you're seeing from 26 to 27 relates mostly, not entirely, to the debt issuance and the additional impact of that. But after that, and given the policy to fairly projected flat, there is growth in that, but not significant increase as shown. The next slide is graphing tax impact, but this is for commercial property, commercial industrial property, and we just picked a range of values so you can see over time what that would look like. This is not your budget. It may not look exactly like this, but given the long-term plan and the goal of maintaining that 3% or the 0.03, this is a reasonable illustration of that. Slide 17, I talked about revenue sufficiency and objectives of ending cash and making sure there's sufficient funds. Here, we just wanted to show you over time, and this is shown by the various funds that are shown: general fund, debt service, capital project, and enterprise. The dip for the enterprise fund is projected to remain in sound financial condition. That's a planned spend down, and that note says that related to the treatment facility. It may be that there's more cash on hand when that comes time, that you would have less bonds that you would issue, or maybe development doesn't happen as it's projected in here, but enough that it's time to do that project. It may be that you have to bond for more than what is shown in here. Maybe there won't be as much accumulation of cash. But the plan provides for that opportunity that if that cash is on hand, that less debt would be issued and you would spend down some of that. And those are why those dollars are being collected. So when there's development fees, and they're being collected to help pay for those type of improvements. I'm going to have just a few comments on the utility rates, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jess to go through. So the projected utility rates. This chart is showing you, for an example, 8,000 gallons per month customer of water usage, what the total utility bill would be. The green is the water bill, the blue is the sanitary sewer, and the yellow is the storm sewer. There is projected growth in the plan related to increases in utility funds. How did we arrive at those? We arrived at those because we were meeting, our goal was that revenue sufficiency, those objectives of ending cash and ending net position for the utility fund. So know that as you go through it, if it's, well, couldn't it be less or this, it would require then changes in what are the planned capital and other projects in order to do that. I have two more charts and focused on utility rate comparison, and this is comparing Carver to other comparative cities, and I would note we give two examples. This is that 8,000 gallons per month. Not every city bills monthly. Some are bi-monthly, a lot of them are quarterly. We convert the other cities for comparison purposes to monthly as well. I would also note interpreting the other cities' fee schedules is sometimes a challenge. We believe this is a reasonable representation of those other cities. We know for Carver it is, but also for the others, and we do this in a lot of communities. But you can see in the middle of the range for that average 8,000 gallons. If you flip to the next slide, here's a larger volume. Carver rates promote that conservation, so as that volume goes up, those users pay more per 1,000 gallons or gallons for that usage. I would also, for both of these comparisons, across the metro, we work with a lot of different cities and do these studies too. We are expecting rates to rise in most cities. One of the important reasons is the Met Council, the disposal charge, for the last few years has been in that double-digit range, and it's now closer to 7-8% in what you pay the Met Council for treatment for disposal sanitary sewer. Some cities didn't do any adjustments, or they had adjustments that were more in the 3% range. So their funds are challenged too, because for most cities, that disposal charge makes up about half of their sanitary sewer budget. So they just haven't made those adjustments. So we're expecting to see that. And I note that because we have not made any assumptions for what other cities are going to be doing for their rates. So this comparison could look quite a bit different next year for many of these cities. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jess.
Thank you. So we're going to stay on the topic of utilities here for the next couple of slides. And as Tammy just mentioned, those comparisons that we were looking at were 2023 rates for a variety of cities. So we're going to look forward now and look at some of the recommendations that we're suggesting for rate adjustments. So we'll start with the water fund. So we are looking at a 3% increase to the water connection charges, to the fixed fees, and then also to the consumption or the volume charges. So the water fund is very healthy, but we want to keep pace with some of those additional expenses that we anticipate the utility to be taking on. So that's why we are suggesting that 3% annual increase. And then for the Southwest area, we are suggesting that the city implement a $5,000 per residential equivalent unit water access charge. And the reason being is that we took a look at the engineering estimates for the build out for the infrastructure for the Southwest area, and then also the development plan for that area. So looking at those residential equivalent units and then sort of backing into what is a reasonable fee as those new homes come online. So we didn't just pull that $5,000 out of nowhere. We did take a look again at what the cost was going to be. So that is specific to that area. Again, you already have those connection charges in place for other areas of the city, so this would be specific to the Southwest area. Looking at the sanitary sewer, a bit more complexity here in terms of what we are suggesting. So first and foremost, we're suggesting that the city implement a fixed fee for the sewer utility. A couple of reasons for this. One, it would bring the rate structure a bit more in line with the water utility structure. Currently, there is a fixed fee for the water utility. And those fixed fees are designed to sort of offset some of the fixed charges for the utility, because you're always going to have some level of expenses for each of the utilities. You'll have to have a certain amount of staff, you'll have facility costs, you'll have debt service, et cetera, no matter how much volume you're treating. So with that, that fixed fee is meant to offset some of those costs. So what we've put into the plan is a $5 fixed fee in '25, increasing that to $10 in '26, and then to $15 in '27, with 3% annual increases after that. Now, we have not had that fixed fee sort of in the plan for 2024, and that's purposeful. We want you to have some time to communicate that change to your ratepayers. As far as the volumetric charges, we are anticipating that you have a 3% increase in '24, but that would ratchet up in the years '25 through 2032 to 5.5%. This is back to what Tammy was talking about with the Met Council charges and those disposal fees. Those are your biggest impact to your variable fees, and we're already seeing, I think it's 6.8% is what MCS is projecting for '24. But again, we want to give you some time to communicate some of these changes to the community, and that's why we're saying at least do 3% in '24 and then kick that up to 5.5% if you can in the out years. That being said, of course, we would suggest that you keep an eye on what MCS is planning to do. They do give a heads up to cities on what they're planning for their increases. So there's a chance that that has to be revisited in later years, maybe up, down, depending on what MCS is going to do. With your connection fees here, we are suggesting again 3% increase to those connection charges, and then same thing that we discussed with water with that southwest area, implementing that $5,000 fee per residential equivalent unit with that adjuster of 3% per year.
Just a footnote on the southwest area, we're still waiting for the developer to kind of say that that's viable, so you won't see that in your fee schedule for next year, but when we are able to go, that's the number that we would use.
What was the kind of inflation assumption? Was that just under 3%, I assume, based on the?
For the variable charges? for
Yeah,
utilities?
you know, it's generally a 3% increase, so we're assuming
Yep,
1
so
to 2% inflation or 1%?
what we've assumed in the plan is 3% for most of the
Okay.
variable expenses, other than MCES.
Do we, and for the sewer rates, what we have a fixed rate right now? Nothing. Okay.
So there's a,
Okay, so we'll go on to the stormwater rates. So stormwater, the stormwater utility is in a position where we need to raise revenues and to do so rather quickly. And that's to support some of the capital expenditures for the stormwater utility and then also to cover the debt service associated with the stormwater utility. So for the residential stormwater base fee, what we're suggesting is that in '24 that we increase that fee by $6 and then the same thing in '25. For all of the non-residential customer classification, raising that by about $14 in both '24 and '25. Now, once we get through '25 and those rate increases, we are not anticipating any additional increases being necessary for that base fee. We would, of course, keep the 3% just to sort of stay in line with what the other adjustments are for your connection charges for the stormwater area charge, but effectively that we're just trying to get to that level that the revenues are sufficient to support the expenses related to the stormwater utility. And the reason that we're looking at those approximate amounts is to try to keep you in line with your current fee structure. Currently, the residential rate is about 1/3 of what the non-residential customer classifications are. So we're just trying to kind of keep that in line with your current fee structure.
So the stormwater, that's our, like, summer watering non-treated, or is that different?
The stormwater would be like, think of drainage, so catch basins, stormwater
okay.
ponds.
Got it, okay. More, sure, okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of permitting, that's the MS4
MS4 stuff,
permitting.
okay.
Yep.
Any additional utility questions before we move on to some of the capital projects?
If you want to move on, you can probably come back with a few
Okay,
questions for you.
that's just fine. Okay, so as Lynn was mentioning earlier, we've taken a look at your capital improvement plan, your equipment plans, basically all of your plans. And we've compiled them here. And so we've got some buckets that we've separated things into here. So we've got municipal facilities, capital equipment and vehicles, your park development, your street improvements, and your fire department. So what we're looking at generally is the sort of spend on all of those projects throughout the years. And of course, that's going to fluctuate quite a bit. The one that you'll see here is '25, sort of the outstanding one. That being that we've got a number of different projects planned for '25, and whether those happen or not will remain to be seen, but we're planning for them currently. So the big ones in '25, municipal facilities, that's related to the public services building, the addition to the fire hall for the storage of the turnout gear, and then we've got some street improvements planned there as well. So we're going to see quite a bit of activity in the next couple of years based on what we've got programmed in the plan currently. And with that, of course, the question becomes, how are we going to pay for all of those projects? So we've got a few different sources here that are programmed in the plan. So bond proceeds, of course, coming in for certain projects. We've got other sources of revenue coming in as well. So we've got intergovernmental revenue that's planned. We've got some park dedication funds, transfers in from some of the funds that the city has currently, and then the use of fund balance as well. And then in most of the years, we've got some property tax support here for these projects as well. And you saw in orange on that last graph some of the bond proceeds. So we are going to, or we've got programmed in the plan, some debt issuance. So what we're showing here is that obviously the city has some outstanding debt currently, and then marrying that new debt on top of it. So where we're seeing in 23 roughly about 33 million or so in outstanding debt, we are anticipating that that will sort of reach a ceiling here of about 60 million in total debt outstanding. And this is total debt, so this also includes your revenue debt. And we do have some bigger ticket items in the out years for water and sewer, which always tend to run a bit higher. So that'll fluctuate over time. But again, we just want to give you that snapshot of what we anticipate for total debt throughout the planning period. And then debt service, of course, as we have total debt outstanding, our debt service payments will also be increasing. Again, looking at 23, roughly 3.3 million in total debt service. Towards the end of the planning period, that's climbing up over 5. And again, that's total debt service, so including those utility or those revenue supported bonds. And then oftentimes when we're doing these plans, councils will ask us, well, what does that mean for our debt service levy? So we've modeled that out for you here. We do, of course, anticipate that the debt service levy is going to increase over time. Again, based on development and those assumptions, we would anticipate that there's additional tax capacity that's coming in to support that overall debt service. Any questions on the debt before we move into some of the more major funds for the city? And again, we can always revisit things. Okay, so we'll take a look at the general fund. So overall, in what we're looking at here is the ending cash balance and the ending fund balance for the general fund. And really what we want you to see here is that overall that's going to be increasing over time. Again, additional service levels with additional development that's going to happen. But what we want you to take away from this, and you'll see that black line, and you saw in one of the previous slides that the target for the fund balance policy is that you're maintaining at least 40% of fund balance within the general fund to stay in compliance with your policy. And what we're modeling out here based on what we've planned in the long-term plan is that you'll be meeting that policy threshold throughout the planning period. Here we'll take a look at the revenues that are going into the general fund along with the expenditures. So as with most cities, and Carver's no exception here, most general fund revenue comes from the collection of property taxes, and we touched on that previously about why do we have that fund balance, and that's due to the timing and collection of property taxes. We also have some other revenues that we are anticipating here for the general fund. So you've got your charges for services, you've got fines and forfeitures, you have investment income and the like. So the bulk of it, of course, coming from property taxes with those other revenues, but the takeaway here is that what we have modeled in our discussions with staff is that we want to plan for the matching of revenues and expenditures, so balanced budget going forward. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about the debt service funds, and this is related to your governmental debt service, so not the bonds that are going to be supported by your water and sewer utilities. So what we're seeing here is the overall increase in cash in your total debt service funds. And part of this is due to the timing and collection of the revenues, the property taxes. As you can see in 23, the ending cash balance for the debt service funds is approximately $2,750,000 or so. And by the end of the planning period, just shy of about $4 million, and you may be wondering why would we want $4 million just sitting there? Most cities have their principal and interest payments due February 1st. And you have to collect that payment ahead of time. And since your collection of property taxes is coming basically in December of the year prior, when you close out the year, you're going to have a significant amount of cash that's sitting there, and then it's essentially out the door about a month later. So that's why you're seeing that cash balance grow over time. And then again, just taking a look at the revenues and marrying that with the expenditures, what we want you to see here is that overall the trend is that the revenues will be sufficient to cover those expenses, which is your debt service payment, and that the bulk of the debt service payment is coming from property taxes with some offset from some additional revenues. So we would anticipate that you've got some special assessment revenue. You may have transfers in from your utility funds or from other funds throughout the city to support that debt service as well. The street maintenance fund, number of projects planned through the street maintenance fund, so you can see that that fluctuates over time. Overall, ending fund balance and ending cash balance will be equal to each other. We're not anticipating any sort of receivables, et cetera, recognized within that fund. But again, looking at sort of those dips as some of that cash is spent down for some of those projects and then increasing over time and then back down. For the revenues and expenditures related to the street maintenance fund, we've got a few different revenues coming in to support those projects. So bond proceeds, we'll see some of that in 2025. If I'm recalling correctly, I believe that is related to the CASA 40 project. That's a big one. We've got some non-property tax revenue coming in for that as well. So that is a local road improvement grant, if I'm again remembering correctly, and some turn back funds. But throughout, you'll see that there's some property tax revenue that's going to come in and support that. But generally, again, the expenditures sort of trend with the revenues coming in to make sure that there is sufficient revenue to cover those projects. Your capital equipment fund. Overall, we do anticipate that this fund is going to build cash. And this is where some of the cash that we're anticipating that may be in surplus from the general fund or other funds is transferred in here, so that you've got this money sort of sitting and available until those projects are identified where you're going to use some of that. So you'll see that cash balance and that fund balance growing over time.
And Jessica, this would be a good representation of our transition from getting out of equipment certificates. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. So as you're able to build up that cash so that you're not having to borrow every time you need a fleet vehicle or a truck or something like that, that you've got some cash set aside for that. And then within the capital equipment fund, again, looking at those revenues versus expenditures. So in 24 in particular, we've got some bond proceeds coming in. Otherwise, looking at the non-property tax revenue. So most of that is coming from transfers from existing funds that are being closed out and other transfers that we would anticipate throughout the planning period. These bond proceeds likely going to be used for some fire equipment, and then I believe you also have a plow truck and I think a loader for public works planned in there. But again, those expenditures and those revenues tracking together. And then this brings us to our last fund, Municipal Buildings Fund. And we didn't give you a graph here on cash versus fund balance because it's really just this blip that you're seeing here. So we are looking at and planning for within the plan the construction of the Public Services Building. We did have some some bond proceeds scheduled for 24, and that was for the land purchase. Whether that happens or not, we've still got it in the plan. And it's anticipated that the city would bond for that land purchase. And then also for that construction, that you'd be bonding for that as well, in addition to that, addition to the fire hall for the turnout gear storage. So again, matching those revenues with your expenditures. And then finally, just a couple of notes in closing. The plan, of course, relies heavily on the assumptions that we're using. So again, we're assuming that the city is going to grow pretty significantly over the next 10 years. And that growth, of course, will impact whether or not you're taking on additional city services, additional staffing, et cetera. So just keeping in mind that the timing of that is going to impact the projected tax levies that we've got included here, the utility fees and the reserves that we're anticipating for the city. And then going back to the very beginning, we've talked about the fact that the city has done long-term planning for a long time. So just encouraging the city to maintain the active management of your funds. And then those key takeaways. This is not meant to be your budget. Your budget is where you make those annual decisions, but generally speaking, this is meant to be that guide as you're putting those budgets together and making those decisions. So I will conclude my comments there, but both Tammy and
right, that was a lot. Who's got questions?
I just verified all my tape flags were answered, so.
No, I thought you were just trying to prove that you read it and you
No.
just stuck some stuff in there. Okay. Okay, Eric's questions were answered. How about yours, Reed?
I just had one on the table 5 about the statutory debt limit. I noticed in 2025 we get pretty close.
Can you tell us what page you're on?
Page 20.
Thank you. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I read through that. We have just a lot of things happen that year. Is that a cause for concern to get that close to it? Or is that just the point of it? It's set low so that you're not super, right? Apparently it's a state law, right? You have to stay under that, but.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
So, like anything, state law is a little bit confusing here in that not all of your debt is subject to that debt limit. So the reason that you're getting closer to it is capital improvement, CIP bonds are subject to that debt. So with that larger issuance.
Sure, okay.
The good news with that is you're not doing major facility type improvements
Sure.
on a regular basis.
Okay.
Debt that is, when you think of debt that is subject to that limit, think of debt that is supported solely by tax levy.
Okay.
For the most part, that's a simple way of thinking about it.
Okay,
Debt
so-
that's supported by utility revenue, not subject to.
Okay, okay, so that's just because we happen to decide that that was the year to build the public services building and then issues, okay. Okay, and then I did notice it decreasing after that, so that's good, just.
And then I would just add there that the sort of moving away from the issuance of equipment certificates, which are supported by debt service levy, and building up that capital equipment fund to have those revenues on hand, that'll also help not build this any further. And again, you have this big new city hall, so you're not planning anything there. And so we've just got those few projects that are out there currently.
Okay.
Great question. Anything else from you, Bree?
No, that was it.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Laura?
I do have a couple of questions, and I wrote down the page numbers from that. More for myself.
Yeah, no, more.
So on page 22, we started talking about stormwater rates. When a resident asks me, why, what is that money for? I understand that we have an increase in expenses. Is it like something specific in like a certain piece of equipment? Is it part of the permitting? It just costs a lot more now? Like, how would I answer if someone said, why does the city need more money from them for?
The major point is cost of treatment. So all metro cities are incurring higher costs for the Met Council and the cost of treatment.
So the treatment of sending it away?
Yes, of sending it
And
away.
then it gets treated, okay, so it's not us
every
who's doing it.
city that, is subject to the Met Council is seeing increases in their disposal charges. That is the main driver here.
I think our annual bill is getting close to $500,000 just for that.
And this year, do we think we have or we're gonna be collecting enough?
I'd have to calculate it out, but I'm guessing.
So basically, we're not collecting enough right now?
No.
Or what it costs?
Right.
When we send it out for
That's
them
correct.
to treat it, okay?
And the fact that we don't have a base rate, like Jess was saying, we're probably not covering a lot of our fixed costs.
Yeah, like it would be hard to predict how
Yes.
much to
Yes.
collect, okay.
Just as an example, by comparison, Cologne is not a part of the Met Council system. And they're frankly stuck because they need to do an $18 million expansion project to their sanitary sewer wastewater treatment plant. And so neither option is good, right? But I think, you'll notice in some of these charts too, like Delano is not a Met Council city. And so each of these cities has, and we've talked about it a ton, but different stories and nuances that make their rates the way that they are. And I think frankly, there's a benefit to going out 10 years and looking, and there's a con that when you look out 10 years, you see more of these things, you're like, we could actually plan for this by doing these things. I think on the front, at least my experience was as we were going through these drafts, it was like, could we soften out that curve on that charge, and that's why you'll see like, 5, 10, 15. That doesn't mean that's the right spot for you all, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background on how we kind of constructed this as far as the presentation goes.
Lori, you asked for, and you guys were replied that we were not bringing in enough to cover what we have, then where's the money coming from right now, currently?
We should have enough money to, at least from my perspective, like the operating, it's this, as you go out into debt service and you look at.
Right, I'm talking about the base fees, because we don't have those, and you said that we're probably not collecting.
If we were to take our actual like Met Council bill and then see what we're charging, percentage wise, probably not charge, our rates aren't going up in relation to what the Met Council rates are going up.
Okay, so we are covered for this year, is that what, then I misunderstood, if that's.
When we get to the year end, if we're under, and we don't hit those revenue projections, it'll drop from fund balance.
Fund balances, yeah.
And that is what is projected in the plan. So it's projected, as has been the case for the last few years, that in '23, expenditures will exceed revenues. So there will be a reduction in the fund's net position. The fund is healthy. You have cash on hand, so it's not that you're going to be in a negative cash position or a negative, I'll call fund balance net position. But the rate increases are needed because you can't, year after year, continue to draw on that cash.
And then do projects on top of that.
And do projects on top of that.
All right, my next question is on slide 25, and I'm just said a phrase that, if I could kind of soften the curve. So it's my understanding that it costs money to borrow money. So for us to do the bonds, we're better off going every maybe few years for what's in the plan versus why don't we just try to level that off? That's not good practice. Is that correct? So I'm trying to think of like how to answer somebody, why are you trying to do so much in 2025 when nothing in the years after? And I would think it has to do with, in the financial plan, to borrow the money knowing that we're going to increase the debt services, just do it once every couple of years.
So the spike in 25 is nearly solely related to the public services project.
It's that
So
significant of a.
You can't split it up, and we're kind of fishing in the dark a little bit on that number because we're working with Wold right now, and we're looking at different properties, and so some of those same synergies of having the fire department next to public services won't be there, and so you're gonna see that number go up. I'm not sure what that looks like, and that's frankly a great example of what this plan does. It'll tell you based on what we knew as we were putting it together, what this looks like. And as you get to budget choices or policy decisions or expenditures, you can say, well, compare, like I know how this will impact the long-term financial plan, and I want to do it, but when we do the next version, I want to draw back on in this other area. We all talked about it, this under drain system, and how we had no idea that at the time the significance of that issue compared to the long-term plan, and so. Really this is just a map of different places you can go, and you can choose your own direction based on what you see it.
So the spike, is it less to do with how many times to go for a bond? Is it more that just the project is that significant?
Correct. You wouldn't be able to split it up. It's probably a once in a generation project, and that's when you need the money.
But to answer your question, generally speaking, if you had a piece of equipment for $250,000, for example, but you know that you have a street project next year that you're going to bond for, we would certainly encourage you, if you can hold off on buying that piece of equipment and combine it rather than doing a small bond issue and having to go through the process and spend the money to do that. Certainly where you can combine it, absolutely. It just turned out that based on kind of the timing of this, that was causing that spike.
Because you'll have what's called like bond counsel variable that does our work, so there's a charge for that, and we have to go through a rating call, there's a charge for that. There's a
municipal advisor fee.
The advisor fee, there's a official document, what's that called?
That's not an extra fee, that's part of the municipal, but
But it's an administration, it's the cost, it's a very big lift, and so you wanna try to collect that
Okay.
in a, reasonable way, rather than going through a rating call and attorney's fees and advisor fees annually.
So every bond issuance, there's some fixed costs independent of the amount, and then there's obviously some variable costs as well.
Correct.
Costs a lot to borrow.
Yeah, okay, exactly, yeah, exactly.
Being 25 is not that far away, I do want to make one comment to that. Because that amount right now is projected to be over 10 million, it may be such that we would recommend, and this is a few years in the future, to split that depending on where the market is at in rates. Issuing bonds at 10 million or less has more favorable rates for reasons I won't get into. So sometimes it makes sense to split them for that reason, even with the cost of issuance. So we would do that analysis at that time to see what makes sense. I just wanted to mention that just in case.
Why are they talking split? So in different years then, or you just bond for two, you just issue two different bonds in the same year?
In a calendar year, if you issue 10 million or less, it's
Okay.
considered bank qualified bonds. So sometimes, depending on where interest rates are at, it makes sense to split it up
Okay.
and do it in 2 years or do a portion as taxable. I'm only saying that just so it's not, I thought you said.
No, no.
Remember?
It's likely it would make sense to do it the way it's shown, but
All
it's
right,
possible. You can write that down.
So for that 2024, have we already decided to issue those 2 million, or is that still projection? Just project, okay.
Those are my questions, thank you.
Christine?
If we went to page 21, when we were looking at this, we were talking about the proposed new city water access charge in the southwest area. So how is this different from our northwest area or anywhere else in town, and why is this rate special?
So it gets into that presentation that Aaron Schmidt and Dan Lamas did about, there is basically a gap in the water and sanitary sewer lines, and so we're gonna bring that there, and then rather than having the first user pay it and have it be kind of a killer on that project developing, to have the city kind of partner with the developer, if you will, install that infrastructure and then spread it out to everyone who's going to be benefiting from it.
Okay, so that's part of that, we've talked about that many
Right.
times. Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly that, and so this is kind of a placeholder that when the developer says that they can make it work and the council is satisfied with the securities that they would present, this is kind of that range, and so this is just noting it for purposes of the plan.
Okay, that answers that. Next page. So I think you knew I was going to have something to say about this page.
What
But
page are you on?
22, the next one. So when we're looking at adding a fixed base fee, and then incrementally, like 5, 10, 15. So the way it appears is that, we need something, let's just get it from the enterprise fund. Let's just raise water rates, let's raise utility rates every time we need to spend money. And I realize that generates revenue, but we all know we get a lot of flack for our utility rates here in Carver. And that when we looked at our comparison cities, we are above the halfway point. And then, I know Brent, you sent out an email with, there were some rate studies that have been, or some studies that have been done, and it started off on Facebook, but and there were some adjustments. So we could, make the assumption that if ours was a little bit off on there, that others may be a little bit off on that list as well. But it didn't bode well for where we sat on that list. So then when we start to look at these fees more and more and more, why are we so high compared to our surrounding cities? Is it because we can have a lot of things, but we can't have everything? Are we doing too much that we have to keep raising these utility fees constantly to cover what we're taking out of the enterprise funds every time we have projects planned as we go?
If I may, I'm gonna take a stab at this.
Sure.
So this
Go
is
ahead.
water,
This is-
right?
this
that
is
we're
meant to be-
talking
let's talk
about.
about this.
You know, Well, okay, but like essentially,
Okay.
this is our water system, and if this, it's not like we have a shiny, new, I feel like we're not going above and beyond with the sanitary sewer. That's something that's really important that works and that's in good operational order. I think if you look, it doesn't matter where you live, everybody kind of gripes about their water bill. Anecdotally, my sister lives in Maple Grove. I follow a Maple Grove community page, and just within the last week, I almost sent it to you. Somebody complained about their water bill and their water bill being so high. We hear about the folks in Chaska complaining about their utilities being high. I think, for me, I think it makes more sense to invest in our system so that we're not, or whomever is sitting in these chairs in 2, 4, 6, 10 years from now, having to like fret about how are we gonna pay for this or that. So this just seems like, and again, this is a snapshot in time, nothing is said and done either which way on this, but it's just giving us an indication of kind of the direction that we need to be headed.
Right, and I absolutely understand that people are always gonna complain, no matter whether you're in Chaska or Maple Grove, Blaine. But when you look at the actual numbers as our compared to cities, we are higher. So I mean, the numbers are there, the stats are there that we are coming in higher. So I think we wanna be cognizant, at least I do, of the fact that everything doesn't say, okay, yes, we are growing and we do need these things, but where, at what literal cost to the rest of the city is this happening? And then when I look at, we're talking about too, about that well, our population will be growing, so obviously that brings in additional revenue and tax capacity to the base. But we just lowered our projections for next year, didn't we? And so when I'm looking at the projections that we have, it makes me a little bit nervous if we're lowering now and then considering they're gonna jump. I realize this is a sliding scale, as this is a long-term financial plan. But when we're looking at numbers that in the plan that actually have dates on them, then that makes it a little bit more concrete than just saying, okay, we might get there in 10 years, we might be able to buy 18 fire trucks.
Can I,
Yes, go ahead.
can I add on? Okay. So I think if we were to just even extend the plan another 5 or 10 years, and I know that feels like a really long time, but that would be like we're
It is, I believe, really old.
Right. But that would be like we're Chanhassen, it'd be like, like we're Chanhassen, like now or something. Their rates probably don't go up so fast like ours, but it's because they're all grown up. And so I look at it like we'll be grown up then. And so I really do think that our rates are gonna hit a point where we're not gonna be increasing. And I think even our long-term plan does show that we're gonna hit a point where we're not gonna need to just keep increasing them. So I think when we say growing pains, it's annoying and it's just like a term, but I really do think that this is where we're at, just because of the size and the infrastructure and all of those things. I think it's responsible what we're doing to plan for all of this. And yes, utility rates, I mean, city of Watertown where I live, yes, we just built a $21 million sanitary wastewater facility, and it was supposed to be $7 million, so you can just imagine what hit that to our utility rates. But every city has its own story, and I think that we will get there. $10, $15, if that's a lot of money to residents, but I think we are gonna hit that point where we will be Chanhassen, we will be Chaska, where I think we'll level off. Anybody agree with that, or?
Well, and thank you for adding that in, Lynn. Brent, did you have something?
Just a perspective to share that, and it's easier said than done because we're all used to working with it and explaining it to the residents, but really sanitary sewer, if you think about it, if it was on Main Street, it's its own storefront. And so whether it's building permits or water or stormwater, like sanitary sewer I would offer out of all these things is the least bells and whistles piece. Like this is almost exclusively pipe in the ground and manholes, and so there really isn't part of the story is our topography and having to do lift stations where gravity sewer could go. When development moves through, we pay oversizing, so they are required to do like a 12-inch pipe, and we say, well, you might need to do a 24-inch pipe, and so your words are really well received, and I think that applies in a lot of areas. I think the point of view on sanitary sewer, on like what's our like degree of or spectrum of decision making for like, are we going all the way, or are we being too fancy, or are we being too stingy, or where's the sweet spot? It's like, it is kind of is what it is.
I'm just laughing because the word fancy and sewer works.
Fancy
Let's not build the fancy.
We have the fancy sewer in Southwest
Yeah, you
Metro.
just seen the sewer Carver.
It's fancy.
But I do think there are, when it comes to like the general fund, there are choices that you can do with like streetscapes and parks and, investing in staff. There's very, like, from a percentage, sanitary sewer is the least amount. I think it's like 10% in most instances of hiring. So it's, if there's really kind of this is just materials, like sanitary sewer is that. But all that said, when I look at I have the same feeling that you do. Yes, it's only $5, but then you add that $5 to other things. For sanitary sewer, like, I hate saying this in like a forum like this, but I don't know if we have a lot of choices on sanitary sewer. And like, to the mayor's point, like some of those pieces, like if you choose to defer maintenance or defer investment, there can be a whole series of unintended consequences that you don't want, where you could maybe let a street, like the pavement surface, go for another 2 or 3 years and have people drive around potholes or patch them.
You can't let your fancy sewer go an extra 3 years.
Yeah.
It's not functioning. Okay, I got it.
Listen, if there's a pothole in the sewer, we'll all hear it.
Yes, we will. Brent, I don't want to cut you off, but that satisfies that question for me. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I was redoing this closely. So in 2025, there's going to be a $5 base fee and then a 5% increase in volume charges as well. Is that what we're projecting?
Okay. So although we realize that these sewer rate charges are actually need to be fairly finite in the plan because they're necessary. Not to say the other things in our plan aren't necessary, but this is a very strong function that needs to work for the city. When we're looking at all of the other fees that are coming in, it's $5 here, it's $5 there, $5 here. That adds up. And when I'm, even tonight when I was looking at the delinquent water utility delinquent, don't have the words in my brain right now. The list, roll, whatever was in there. It was long and it was big. And the economy is not great right now. And so everything has gone up from, obviously we know, food, gas, house, everything, taxes. And what I fear a little bit is that I don't want Carver to be, you can live here if you are wealthy. And if we keep the death by 1,000 cuts of 5 and 10 and 15 here, are we pricing out part of a population that we want to have welcomed into Carver too? And is that, again, correlated to maybe bigger dreams than we can afford to have in an economy like this? So I just want that's just me putting my bug in council's and staff's ear. So I'm gonna go, I don't know if anyone wants to reply to that before I go to page 8.
So my reply to the discussion is, the way I'm interpreting this is our plan for managing income and spend. It's really up to us to help manage perception and value. And we really need to be cognizant of that, because these things need to happen, or what is the alternative and what is the consequence, like driving over potholes. And maybe when we're delivering a value proposition, it is paired along with our growth curve, because our cohort cities don't have that same growth curve. So I think it really is up to us to build the value into that. It doesn't change what you just said about, is Carver, is it going to be more expensive? Yeah, I think it's going to be more expensive. Hopefully the build in the north and the south brings, our spend in utilities brings a wider variety of housing that maybe addresses that. But for the purpose of this presentation, this is the income and the spend and what that projection looks like. I think we have the conversation later about building the value. That's just my comment.
Yeah, and I think building the narrative that we bring out with it is obviously important so that people understand, which we try to do with anything that we have that is a raise. It doesn't change the numbers. So I just want to make sure that we aren't putting in gold and silver.
No gold power.
I was thinking stainless steel.
Stainless steel manhole
Sorry,
covers?
So was this one of the funds where we're actually subsidizing, where we're not, right, part of the sewer fund where currently the city is basically subsidizing, right? Our rates don't match what we're paying out to Met Council and.
Yeah, our fund balance, I would say for sanitary and storm, we're every year we're digging into fund balance.
Okay.
And so we want to be in a position where we're not drawing that down.
We could demonize Met Council.
Yeah.
Well, they,
No, I'm-
never mind. I'll
We don't have enough time for any track of time. Chrissy, I just wanna let you know, I hear you. I definitely don't want this to become, a highbrow community where everyone has an expensive sports car. So please know that point is taken, and I think there are other areas. I also think, like, if you read this makes sense to me. That said, we've been discussing it for more than an hour. We all probably spent at least that much time over the weekend going through it, right? And I don't think it's reasonable to say to a resident like, here, read the financial plan, because they probably have better things to do with their time. But it's part of the story, and I think now we are armed with that data to kind of talk about it. And I know I made a Facebook post today where I copied a lot of your language, so thank you guys, this is perfect. But I do hear you.
Thank you. I had one other question and I didn't write it down correctly as to where it was at. So if I find it, it had to do with one of the graphs, so I'll hand
Okay.
it now.
Anybody else have any questions? Because I think we're at the point. Moving on. Thank you.
Yes.
I'm excited that we're doing this for 10 years. I think that while sometimes heartburn provoking, this is a good exercise just to see trends and have an idea of where we could go, where we should go, where we want to go. So,
Thank you for your time.
Great presentation.
Thank you.
Tammy and Jess did an amazing
Yeah.
Yeah.
working on this with Lynn's help as well, but I just wanted to.
Back at you guys.
I just want to say, like, this is the best experience that I've had personally dealing with this, because it's just as much content and narrative as it is the numbers. And to the point that you're talking about at the end, our biggest step is communicating this rather than just giving somebody 50 pages worth of spreadsheets. So.
Well done, guys.
thank you.
Thank you. Have a good meeting.
Thanks. Lynn, how do you feel about 12 minutes for draft? Truth and taxation. Good luck, Lynn. Thoughts and prayers, Lynn.
I'm feeling good.
Okay. Speed round.
All right, so I just want to give council an opportunity to get your eyes on the presentation before we go live with this. So I am going to move quickly. Just stop when you have a question. If we need to carry it over to the regular meeting, we can.
Let's do questions as they come up.
Yep.
So that then we don't have to try to remember what
Yep.
we were thinking.
That's
if
kind of
it
what I
does
was
carry
thinking.
over. Okay.
All right, so here we are. We are at the TNT. The truth and taxation will be December 4th. So we all know why we have to do this. It's for transparency, educate, and to get feedback from the residents. Proposed statements will be inserted here, and I will show the different taxing entities. Home valuations, an average of the valuation increase in Carver was around 4%. If you have questions, please reach out to the property tax department at Carver County.
Can I just interrupt? It
Yeah.
feels like, I think Thanksgiving being earlier, it feels like we're way late in the month.
Yeah,
When
we are.
those statements due? Any day now?
Any day now.
And we never have any indication, we're just
We're
surprised.
Did you
talking
just
about
get
these?
yours?
So it's a-
Yeah.
Oh, you
Yeah.
got yours.
It's today's
Yeah,
mail.
so-
Okay, I haven't been home yet, so.
I emptied my mailbox in the dark. It may be in the front seat of my car right now.
Percentage change was
Awesome.
2.4%.
Okay.
Really, mine was 30%.
Really?
Yes.
What'd you do, Christy?
Did you finish your basement?
No.
Did you get a palace?
Wait,
Go ahead.
10 minutes.
Okay.
10 minutes.
Okay.
We'll talk about that later.
So we pay $0 in franchise fees. This is, a lot of this is
Yep.
repeat, so I'm just gonna fly
Yep,
through this.
yep.
Okay. You guys have seen this. This is a new slide. General fund revenue rundown, local government aid, 209,000. Last year was 121,000. Public safety aid, we talked about that. It's a one-time aid this year. Building permit revenue, we ratcheted down on this a little bit just because the end of 23 has been a little bit lower than we had projected. So we're just trying to stay consistent with the trends. And then we have our rural fire contracts. Here's a slide, just a little bit more visual for showing the property tax all the way down to our facility fees and licenses. So we're projecting a total general fund revenue of right around that $4 million. And then here's the same, we want to keep a balanced budget, so the expenses is $4 million as well. General fund expense spotlight, we have the police contract, Parks and Rec agreement, Southwest Prime. I need to update that because we increased Southwest Prime to about 45,000. We have our spring cleanup day, and then our community survey.
Quick question on the police contract. Does that include the credits we've received because we haven't had full coverage?
Right, so we don't get those until the actual year happens. So we get those as they come. So if we get any credits in 24, that number will be reduced in 24. So I can't anticipate what kind of credits we'll get in 24. Good question though. Employee pay and benefits, we have a 5% pay increase for all full-time and part-time employees. This is including fire department and the seasonal staff. And we are adding one full-time public services technician in the general category to be added in July of 24. Our health insurance rate increased by 9.75%. We had budgeted 10, so we were right there. And then we're increasing our life insurance coverage from 25,000 to 50,000, and it was just a very, small increase to the city. Our capital improvement needs, we're transferring money from the general fund to the capital improvement fund for the Church by the River roof and the Lions Park courts. And then we have local government aid being transferred for the 3rd Street Bridge improvement. And then we talked in the previous presentation about the equipment certificate, and those items are in the center there. And then down at the bottom, we're using some of that public safety aid money to pay for some things in the fire department. We're putting a little bit of money away for that turnout gear expansion project. Here's a rendering of that Lions Park court facility. It's got pickleball, tennis court, and the half basketball court. Again, we have our 2024 preliminary tax rates. This is for our Carver County cities. You guys have seen this slide. This is a new slide. Here's our historic tax rate.
Do you want to throw a little asterisk on the cities that are collecting franchise fees on that one too, so we can compare
Or
that?
the ones that aren't, whichever's less asterisk.
Yeah, to make us look better.
Sure, yeah.
Let's get all these ones out.
So I graphed out our historic tax rate starting at 54.6% back in 2014, and then all the way to our proposed 2024 at 39.7%.
Just a little commercial, just back on what we were talking about with comparing cities. Back in 2014, Chaska's rate was probably in the mid-20s, so when people would say, why are taxes so much higher?
Yeah.
Than Carver, or than Chaska, 30% difference if you go back to that previous slide. But Chaska's in this mode now where they're having to do all these building improvements, or they're choosing to do that. And we're within 4%. And so this to show you that over time, some of these, what appears to be huge differences between communities, and they still are, they're a population of 30,000, but some of those things over the course of time do even out.
Yep, good point.
When we're real old, Lori.
And then I will be gathering the Pierce City rates as well. It's a little harder because not all of them are in Carver County, so I'll be digging for those tomorrow. And then you guys have seen this here. This is our debt service preview. It's 1.2 million. It's decreased the last 2 years in a row. And then here's our street maintenance and pavement management plan. This is year 3. We are levying for $420,000. Big project, super excited about it on 4th Street next year. And then here's our general fund levy history going back to 2021. So the levy increase has changed a little bit. It's just 13.75% proposed for 2024. For estimated property taxes, our average valued home per Carver County increased by 4.3%, which takes the average value home from $410,000 last year up to $428,000 this year. So that would increase the property taxes on that average valued home by $165 annually.
And that's, to your point, Christie, I mean, some homes are gonna go up more or less.
Right.
That's depending on, your value, I suppose, went up quite a bit as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I didn't finish my basement.
No.
And
Rocks and dirt.
this is the city portion only that we're talking about.
Yes.
So I'll
I
have,
like this a lot.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
Yeah, I
this
think
is-
that's a good break.
all right, so, if we were to look at this like it was a bill, I like to say, what is this all paying for? Well, we have to have fire protection and, finance and building inspections and street maintenance, and so we talk about it as, how do I break this down for the average valued home of, well, it's $141 per month for all of the city services. And I'd say here in Carver, we do try to provide really good value for the services, so, yeah. So I will be presenting that,
I like that a
I
lot.
really
I think
do.
that tells a good story and it
Yeah.
helps people understand.
yeah,
Like,
So
what's
what are you
happening?
spending?
yeah. Okay. Just send me more comments, I'll get those home values updated, and sorry about getting your property tax statements today. Like,
I'm excited to go look at
I am
mine.
not.
I'm very sorry as well.
Okay, let's see, we will, Vicki, hold the draft fee schedule for the meeting. City managers report, lightning round, you got it?
I don't wanna go lightning round.
Okay, do you wanna hold?
Sure.
Okay, then council requests, anything? Lightning round?
I have one that
Lightning round.
I will make lightning round is, since we don't have snow on the ground yet, and leaves have
That's how you
now.
jinx us.
True. And now the leaves have pretty much fallen. Is there any option or like interest even? I've heard from one or two people about a second fall cleanup day. And I have no idea how good the turnout
We
was.
budgeted too.
Okay, and I didn't know what turnout or that if it was a budget thing, so. All right, that answers it.
I believe that's,
Okay.
did we have good turnout for the second one?
I think the first one was better, but we were probably in just under 75 cars on the second one, the fall one. We filled up-
75 individuals or 75 trips? Because I remember in the spring, you were like, that guy's been here 6 times.
75. There was a couple of people that came through twice, but we filled up 2 30-yard dumpsters,
Oh,
so it was a good turnout.
okay.
Okay. That answers it.
Sorry to be like, good idea, no.
Struck lightning down on it.
Yeah. All right, with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
A motion by Reed,
I'll second.
second by Christie. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed,